Welcome to Cryptic Accounts, the podcast by paranoid people for paranoid people. This week on the show, we have Presidents and UFOs Part 2, The Space Force Strikes Back. I'm your host for the week, Dennis Cheney, here with, as always, with my good friend Patrick Ryan. How are you doing, Patrick?
I'm good. That's quite the title.
I'm
I
going
like
for
it.
the long titles.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a spiritual successor to the last episode that I did.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. For those who 2 weeks back, we did one on Kennedy's last stand, Eisenhower, UFOs, MJ-12, and JFK's assassination, which is a book written by Michael Salla. And this week, we're going to jump forward into history a little bit and get into one of your favorite topics, Space Force, Patrick.
Yeah, I love me some Space Force and whatever weird things they might be up to.
Yeah. You have kind of a pet theory that, like, we've talked before in other episodes that, like, Space Force might be like a kind of a way to disclose things, you know?
Yeah. And I think we actually talked about it a couple weeks ago.
We have. I think every time it comes up, we kind of talk about it. I think we did that also in our satellite episode, in our secret technology episode.
Yeah, because I don't think that the Pentagon and the CIA is going to come out and admit all the stuff they lied about. But if you use another agency that's new, like they look like the good guys because now they're here and they're wanting to expose all this, somehow, it won't really bring any real ridicule on the people that actually, or the groups that actually did it because we're weird like that. I don't know.
And I'm coming at this from a different angle, but it's kind of ends up maybe in the same place, but we'll go through it. But to refresh everyone's memory, and you don't have to listen to the last one I did on JFK and Eisenhower, but basically
You should, though. They should go listen
yeah,
to it.
actually you really should. I don't know why I'm telling people not to listen.
And then like, rate, and subscribe. Do all that. Help us out.
Do all that stuff.
Plug real quick.
But to refresh where we kind of left off, we talked about how after Roswell, the UFO secrets and technology, if you will, were really kind of whisked away and taken under the wing of the military-industrial complex and the intelligence agencies, and basically all the dark parts of our government that are need to know. And we discussed how even for presidents don't necessarily need to know. So we talked about Eisenhower and JFK's attempts to get at that technology. And when we left off, basically JFK had succeeded in this years-long, basically, project of his administration to try to get Russia to agree to do a joint space program with us. He wanted us to go to the moon with Russia, and he needed all of the secret intelligence and technology programs to share their information with NASA so that we could live in this peaceful world and accomplish this goal. And he actually got Russia to agree to it in November 1963, and then was shot in the head 2 days later. And that's where we left off. It looks like the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, won.
I mean, there's a lot of, things that line up there. It's kind of hard to go. There's no way that's okay. Yeah. 2 days before he was doing all that. Ugh.
And the only reason I label this a sequel is basically the theme of, one, our secret space technology, and two, possibly different presidents' attempts to get at that. Because one of the themes of the last episode was that one way a president can get at the technology is to reclassify things from the intelligence world into the military world. Because as commander-in-chief, the president has a lot more control over the military than they might over the intelligence world.
Yeah.
So we left off in 1963, tragic death of JFK, and now we're going to skip ahead in time to a time and a place where you might not expect us to start. The year is 2001.
Okay.
It is before 9/11. We're going to the peaceful hills of Scotland.
Okay.
There have been many computer hackers and groups that have emerged since the advent of the personal computer with their own personal agendas, whether it be fame, money, political reasons, or just to have a good time. However, there is one name that stands above the rest, and this man is Gary McKinnon. His work has been called, quote, the biggest military computer hack of all time. most notably by a U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, which tried to put him in jail for the rest of his life. Starting back in March of 2001, Gary McKinnon decided that he wanted to make a difference in the world. He knew that the government was holding back information and technology that everyone could benefit from. And some people say that he was inspired by the movie War Games. You might have heard this story. Some people say he was looking for free energy. He himself basically said he grew up hearing about UFOs from his stepfather. He read a book about hacking and how you could do good with hacking, and he went for it. Considered to be a folk hero by many hackers, McKinnon says that he views himself as a humanitarian, an investigative researcher, if you will, and his quest for the truth to better his family, fellow neighbors, and the planet has landed Gary into some serious trouble. During his, quote, investigative research, Gary McKinnon breached the Department of Defense computer networks from the Army, Navy, and Air Force, reportedly costing somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000 in damage, and critically shutting down a naval air stations network. Additionally, he was able to gain access to 98 computers at the Pentagon and 16 NASA computers, including an entity known as the U.S. Space Command. And
wait, hold on. Okay, now I got so many things I want to go back.
Yeah.
How did he cause almost $1 million in damage hacking?
It's disputed. I don't know, but as we get into the story, you'll find out that
just frying computers. That's the only thing I think you could really do.
I don't know if it's because they had to spend money to secure these things.
Yeah, had to beef up security on them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he opened doors that other people used. In the long run, we'll never know, which is what you'll find out in the story.
Also, he found something called the U.S. Space Command in 2001.
Yep.
Okie dokie.
He hacked into the U.S. Space Command's computers. But we'll get into the U.S. Space Command. That's going to be a big part of this episode.
Okay.
So at the time in 2001, Gary was really not practically able to download much data using his 56K modem.
Frustrating times.
Frustrating time. And I'm not sure if I buy that, by the way, because screenshots exist, and a lot of what he accessed wasn't. I mean, I remember having a 56K modem. Once a picture loaded, you could drag it to your desktop.
Yeah.
So again, we'll get into it.
Okay.
But he was, however, able to view a lot of the USA's sensitive information. McKinnon was able to gain the majority of his access through remote access of administrative accounts and enabling himself as a domain administrator. Once an account with a blank password was discovered, it was simple as logging in and letting his research begin. Yeah. This is pre-9/11.
The top level of it still.
Yeah.
Welcome to Space user Command. Without a password. Here, let me just cozy into this one. Make a password. Now I'm a user.
I remember seeing other news articles around that time of 9/11 where they were talking about how easy some of this stuff was back then. It's pretty shameful for these intelligence agencies. But so he hacked all these networks. I like the idea that you have the super secret or whatever Space Command, and then it's what's the password? Oh, it's 1 2 3.
His password.
So he basically spent most of the year in 2001 into 2002 just getting into these computers whenever he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And that was until he was discovered by a network engineer while viewing a certain photo. They discovered that he had hacked, and they had basically kicked him out. And the next day, British authorities caught up with him in London and seized all his stuff, all his computer equipment. And with the British authorities, it remains to this day. So while on NASA and U.S. Space Command networks snooping around, he had come across way more than he had actually bargained for, or, maybe exactly what he was looking for. McKinnon was first interviewed by police in March of 2002. After this interview, his computer was seized by authorities, and he was interviewed again in August. And by this time, UK National High-Tech Crime Unit was on the case. In November of 2002, McKinnon was indicted by a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia.
So is he American?
He is Scottish.
Okay, that's right. Okay, and he's in London while he's doing this, or he's moving around while he's hacking.
He's not quite the super spy he sounds like. He's just kind of on his personal computer doing this.
Okay.
So I think at the time he was living in London.
Okay.
So he was eventually indicted in November of 2002 on 7 counts of computer-related crime, and each one of those counts carried a 10-year jail sentence. So he was facing 70 years in jail. And to make matters worse, when he was initially arrested by like just the London police, he admitted to literally everything because they told him like, look, this is hacking. There's probably like a 6 months of probation or something like that. And then it just blew up into a decade-long legal battle. So the United States government, hot on its tail, don't want that Space Command stuff getting out. And this is super. I remember hearing about this. I did not realize how long this dragged out. And I
don't remember anything about this. Like this is. I'm sure I was somewhat aware of it at the time, but this isn't ringing any bells.
So I'm not going to get into all the legal details because it was quite the battle between him and the UK and the US and the EU. But the highlights raise some interesting questions. So for starters, Britain kind of acted like they were cooperating with the United States, but they just kept making repeated excuses that dragged this out. Like they would say, well, we can't take him into custody because it would be too hard for us to prosecute him because all the evidence is in the United States. They would make that type of excuse. So he actually.
Why do I feel like they're maybe going through all this information?
Yeah, keep in mind they have a computer. And by the way, they seized all this stuff. They claim he didn't have anything, but he had to have had something, right?
Wait, so they arrested him and then they said they didn't find any evidence? Like
no, I'm just saying the official story is that he never downloaded anything because he had this slow modem or whatever. But
oh yeah, that's right.
They took his stuff. They've never given it back, and there's probably something on there. I just don't buy this. And so for whatever reason, Britain's like not really doing everything they can. In 2003, the U.S. actually proposed a new extradition treaty with Britain, which Gary actually believes was written specifically for him. But they didn't say it. And the extradition treaty actually said that the U.S., in order to take someone out of Britain, would not have to provide any, quote, contestable evidence, meaning you got to just hand them over. We don't have to show you what they did.
Knowing how they like to name things, I'm sure it was called like the Gary Clause or something, like, and then they tried to play it off like Gary stood for something else, like it was an acronym.
Yeah, why do we do that with laws? So eventually, Britain signed it in 2005. Now this whole time, Gary's free.
So he's just running around London, just in Europe in general. I'm assuming
he's just living his life, but he has this legal thing hanging over his head. And at this time, a lot of stuff was swirling around. So another highlight is in 2006, people filed Freedom of Information Acts related to him with NASA. Nothing came up except for some records of like employees browsing the internet about him. But if you think about it, they use this as an excuse for, oh, he really didn't find anything because NASA didn't have anything on him. NASA wouldn't have anything on him because he's just the anonymous hacker taking stuff from them. You know what I'm saying? Like they wouldn't keep files on him. So are
they going off of because he had a profile?
I know it's just a guy. It's just a guy. Like he's nothing special.
But he never worked for NASA or anything.
No, he's just a guy in the UK who was interested in UFOs, and he decided he knew some hacking, and he decided to see what he can find.
The NASA part's just, I think, weird me out. Like, does NASA have some, like, investigation unit that we don't know about? Like,
I don't know.
That looks into, like, UFO conspiracy theorists or something?
Well, I think what they were... You'll understand when we get into what he found.
Okay.
But I think I think other researchers were trying to do a backdoor to see what he might have seen.
Okay.
in 2008, and man, I swear the British government, if you really think about it, in 2008, 80 British members of Parliament signed documents declaring that if Gary ever were to be indicted or charged or have to serve any time, he would have to do it in the United Kingdom, meaning like we're not letting him out of this country.
Okay.
And the UK media, which I think at the direction of the British government, was all over this. In 2009, a member of Pink Floyd released a music video for him. There was also a full concert with a bunch of famous musicians in 2008 to like free Gary McKinnon. It was a big deal over there. Like they were not letting this guy go. And around this time, also like business people in the UK. Oh, go ahead.
I sort of admire it in a little bit. I mean, it's in a weird way. Like, I don't know. I think you probably want the U.S. to stop another country from extraditing you if you did some weird. I don't know.
Like business people were raising like hundreds of thousands of dollars for his defense fund.
It's one of those things that it's like, how did this catch support like this? But it's like, all right, well, I mean, that's cool, I guess. You guys are like, you want to deal with your own. Like, he should get in trouble for the hacking part, but it's just like they're not going to send him to the people that he hacked.
Right, and he basically never did get in trouble. I mean, in my opinion, the British government had to have been trying to avoid, and we'll get into this in a second, but
okay.
You know, this basically went on and on. In 2010, reporters asked Obama and David Cameron, who was prime minister at the time, when they were doing a joint press conference, what they were going to do about Gary McKinnon. This was an issue for like a decade. The two agreed that they would find a, quote, appropriate solution, which was another example of what seemed to be an impasse between the U.S. and the U.K. And this all culminated in October 2012, so a decade later, when British Prime Minister Theresa May defied U.S. authorities, blocked his extradition, and then announced that she was using quasi-judicial powers on human rights grounds based on Gary McKinnon's Asperger's syndrome and depressive illness to basically block any attempt to ever send him to the U.S. and prosecute him. She used it as an excuse. She said, well, he has Asperger's and depression, and we're scared he'll kill himself.
All right.
And this decision was obviously criticized by the U.S. State Department, but it was welcomed all across the U.K. Of all the U.K. politicians. Now, here's my thinking on it. I do not believe that he never downloaded anything. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
So whatever he had on his computer, Britain has it.
Yeah.
And this is during the War on Terror. Britain was our number one ally during that. If he had been looking up satellite images of the Mideast or whatever, you know they would be cooperating. So this has to be something that we have that Britain didn't have until they got a hold of his computer. Which is why we refused to show them what we had, and they refused to show us what they have, and we're basically at this standoff for 10 years while we were acting like we all have the same goals. We wanted this guy. Britain didn't want us to have it because of whatever was on his computer. This excuse about mental health also doesn't make any sense. If you read about this guy, I mean, you would think he was like a teenager, autistic person who was just messing around like whoopsie daisy, but he was not. He was a 34-year-old man. He might have Asperger's, but you can watch interviews with him online. He completely knew what he was doing. He is a completely mature adult. He admits he was interested in UFOs, and he did this all premeditated. Yeah, pretty much. And he wasn't even like a genius. Like when you listen to like what he did, he wasn't a genius hacker. He used like basic hacking techniques to get in there. So all of this adds up to me that Britain got control of something they weren't supposed to have, and basically in the most like British polite way possible, they found a way to like drag this out until nothing happened.
And I don't really have any. That's basically what I take away from the whole thing too. Like that's what it seems like.
So the dude's free today. Yeah.
Because I mean, even if he didn't download something, if he was in there for 2 years, he did something as far as documenting what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like this isn't like scrolling Facebook or something where he's just bored and he's just looking through DOD stuff or whatever. Like
No, he was on there with a mission. Like, why would you go there on a mission? You find top secret stuff and then you don't download it. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
Or take a screenshot.
and there was obviously so much that you went back, or there was new stuff coming in regularly or something.
Mm-hmm. He just. So, do you want to know what he found, Pat?
Yes, of course I want to know.
So, McKinnon, who avoided extradition to the U.S. over his hacking exploits after a high-profile campaign, reported seeing details of a secret space program, pictures of otherworldly craft, and a list of, quote, non-terrestrial officers.
What?
He described in one picture what looked to be a hemisphere of Earth and what looked to be a satellite. It was a cigar-shaped and had geodesic domes above, below, to the left, and to the right. It was a cigar-shaped craft, basically, with like domes to look out of.
Okay.
And although it was a lower resolution photo, it was very close up. It was hanging in space, the Earth's hemisphere visible below it. No rivets, no seams, none of the stuff associated with normal man-made manufacturing. His first thought was, this is not man-made. And we're going to link to an interview that he did in 2015 where he describes how he was looking at the cigar-shaped craft. And it's like almost something out of a movie. So he's in the government servers. And he says, by the way, it was super easy once he got in to find the way they categorize stuff. And he was basically looking, he got to this picture of a UFO, and then all of a sudden the mouse started moving on its own. Somebody else was like, no, you don't. And that was
the 2002 when he finally got caught.
Yeah, that's the day right before the Brits rolled in. So McKinnon actually later learned that these photos of the craft would get passed on to the public after basically the images of the craft were airbrushed out. And however, that's not the only thing he had stumbled across. He also found an Excel spreadsheet, a set of military orders with names and ranks on it, underneath the heading, quote, non-terrestrial officers. Further, what these orders were, he also found evidence of, quote, fleet-to-fleet transfers and the names of ships, including the USS Curtis LeMay and the USS Roscoe Hillenkotter. McKinnon quickly cross-referenced this information to no avail and could find no U.S. naval ships or crews, for that matter, that matched. While viewing this information, which he did not expect to find in the first place in other files, he got the feeling that they were and are, in fact, an entire U.S. spacecraft fleet in orbit or somewhere off the planet.
Whoa.
He also claimed to find evidence of zero-point energy and basically advanced anti-gravity technology. In an interview with the BBC, he stated of the Disclosure Project that there are some very credible, relied-upon people all saying, yes, there is UFO technology, there's anti-gravity, free energy, and it's extraterrestrial in origin, that they've captured spacecraft and reverse engineered it. He said he investigated a NASA photographic expert's claim that the Johnson Space Center's Building 8 images were clearly cleaned of evidence of UFO craft, and confirmed this by comparing the raw originals, which he had actually seen, with, quote, processed images. So I have a picture here. Maybe we could, I guess we can throw it up on the website, of the USS Hillenkotter, which
wow, that's bigger than I was thinking.
That's about the size of the cigar-shaped craft people see. And
that's what I'm talking about. The actual, like, with the bubbles on all the, like, ends of it. Like, it's got a long middle to it. Like, it's as big as, like, an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, they compare it there to, it's basically the same size as an aircraft carrier. It's just a non-terrestrial vehicle. I got curious. I was like, who is Roscoe Hillenkotter? Turns out he's a real person. He was the third director of the post-World War II United States Central Intelligence Group, third director of the CIA, first director of the CIA, created by the National Security Act of 1947. He served as the director of Central Intelligence from the 40s into the 50s, and after his retirement from the U.S. Navy, was a member of the Board of Governors of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon from 1957 to 1962. Basically, he has the exact resume you would have of someone you would name a spaceship after.
Yeah.
And fun fact, he's one of the 12 alleged MJ-12 members.
Oh, well, that's quite the coincidence.
It is quite the coincidence. So this is what he claims to see. Nobody's ever denied that this is what he's seen. No government has ever come out and said that's preposterous. That's not what he saw. They're just like, we want to stick you in jail, basically.
Yep.
We
would like to disappear you now.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that he remembered the name of that craft and it happens to line up with a member of MJ-12 who was a real person and who fits the resume, worked for the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. The other one was also a real person. He was a chief of staff of the Air Force. Not as much fun facts about that guy. He ran as a segregationist for vice president in the 1960s.
Okie dokie.
But he was a big fan of nuclear bombs and he headed up the Air Force. So that would make sense for him to also be involved with advanced technology. That's the story of Gary McKinnon. He's currently living his life. He runs an SEO firm. Nothing special. This is his big claim to fame in the history books, is that he basically exposed the going-ons of the U.S. Space Command back in 2002.
Yeah, wow. So...
And kind of on accident. It wasn't like he ran a blog or something. Like, he was just doing this for himself, more or less. And then
I'm gonna go ahead and assume that that's really just Space Force is a rebranding of this thing, the U.S. Space Command.
In the past, when I had heard this story, I assumed U.S. Space Command was either a top secret organization or it was made up. You know, it's supposed to sound exotic, like look what I found. But it turns out, Patrick, that it's actually neither top secret nor is it made up. It's just a real thing that the military's it's just a real part of the military.
Okay. Is it like Army or Air Force, or it's its own like?
It's neither, and we're gonna oddly enough get into some like structures of the U.S. military tonight.
That's kind of why I wondered if it had become Space Force, because that's kind of a new branch of the military. It's its own thing now.
Kind of. We'll explain it as we go. But for now, I'll explain that the U.S. Space Command is a unified combatant command of the United States Department of Defense, responsible for military operations in outer space, specifically all operations above 100 kilometers of sea level. It was created in 1985 as part of President Ronald Reagan's SDI programs.
Our boy who thought it would be good for the human race to have like an enemy in space.
Yeah, the guy who in 1987 said, I often think how we would unite if we had a alien species that was our enemy.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. It was created to provide joint command and control for all military forces in outer space and coordinate with other combat commands. SpaceCom was inactivated in 2002. Dun, dun, dun. And its responsibilities and forces were merged into the United States Strategic Command. So
as they tend to do with things.
Yeah. So
people figure it out and then they disband it and move it somewhere else.
Now, the official story was that it just was kind of a coincidence with the Gary McKinnon thing because they, quote, wanted to de-emphasize space as we moved into like the 9/11 wars. Which really makes no sense. Like, you spend 17 years building this space command, and then you like get in a real war, and you're like, let's just de-emphasize it. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm gonna assume that's not the truth.
No. So this was all set up as part of Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative organization, which is part of the U.S. Department of Defense. And its purpose was to oversee development of a wide range of advanced weapons concepts. This included lasers, particle beam weapons, ground and space-based missiles, various sensors, high-performance computer systems, basically all the stuff you would get from UFOs. Yeah. And they would basically need this space command to coordinate how these tools would be used by the branches of the military.
Okay.
And a number of these concepts were tested through the late 1980s, and spin-offs continued to this day. To go further into it, SDI was also charged with developing high-energy physics type stuff, supercomputing, and advanced materials. It's impossible to track all the money because, like most military stuff, a lot of it was done by like private research laboratories, universities, and industries. But this at the time was a big deal in the 80s. Reagan, you might know this actually as Star Wars, quote unquote, which is what people kind of heckled when they called it.
Yeah.
And Reagan's idea for this technology is actually really reminiscent of JFK's idea of going to the moon with Russia. And this was really no secret. Reagan's idea basically was to build a set of satellites that would be capable of destroying nuclear weapons if they were launched with lasers.
Okay.
That's one of the main goals. And he saw this as a way to eventually eliminate the threat of nuclear war. And he openly talked about and tried to convince the USSR to partner with the United States on this. So at the famous Reykjavik summit, which was a big nuclear weapons summit in 1986 with the Soviet Premier Gorbachev, Reagan once again reiterated his commitment to SDI and repeated an offer he had made many times before to share strategic defense technology with the Soviet Union as a way of eliminating ballistic missiles. So his idea was, look, we're in this crazy mutual assured destruction scenario. It's really, really similar to JFK and the Apollo program. He's like, how come instead of this I'll blow you up if you blow me up type thing, let's work together. Let's build these crazy satellites with lasers. There'll be no point in launching nuclear weapons, and we'll both control the satellites, and we could just live in peace, actually. That was Reagan's big plan.
I mean, it's not a bad idea.
It isn't. No, it really isn't. I feel like you could write like an alternative history of the Cold War. Like I had no idea JFK and Reagan were like this into like working with the Soviets. Like you never hear this stuff
either. Yeah, I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about this.
So yeah, this is all mainstream, man. This is like straight up newspaper articles from the 80s. Like this is what Reagan wanted to do. He wanted to, and eventually the plan was we just like destroy our missiles because you can't build a missile good enough to overcome that advanced.
Yeah.
Whatever technology we had. And again, like you said, this is the same Reagan who in 1987 talked about how we'd work together if there was an alien force. Did you know that Reagan saw a UFO, Pat?
No, I did not.
In 1974, and this might be what kicked off his interest, he was on a 4-person plane with some other people. At the time, he was governor of California. He was with some other politicians. And he saw, quote, what appeared to be several hundred yards away, fairly steady light until it began to accelerate. And then the light took off at a 45-degree angle at a high rate of speed. Everyone on the plane was surprised. The UFO went from a normal cruise speed to a fantastic speeds instantly. If you give an airplane power, it will accelerate, but not like a hot rod. And that's what this was like. And that's actually a description from someone who was with him. And Reagan confirmed this encounter with a journalist. It was actually the Washington bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal in the 70s. He said, we followed it for several minutes. It was this brilliant bright white light. We followed it all the way to Bakersfield, and all of a sudden, to our utter amazement, it shot straight up into the heavens.
Whoa.
When Miller, the reporter, expressed some doubt, a, quote, look of horror came upon Reagan's face as it dawned on him that he was speaking to a journalist. Immediately afterward, according to her, Reagan, quote, clammed up and never discussed the incident with anyone publicly afterward.
Oh, man, that's wow.
So
that says a lot right there that he was that stunned about it. Like he didn't even. That's crazy.
It's kind of like he just like had to tell someone, and he probably knew this reporter. You know what I mean? He's just like telling her as a friend. Now, here's another thing you got to know about Space Command. According to the official story, it was discontinued 2002, reestablished August 29th, 2019. That sound familiar, Pat? that's
Yes.
that's Trump's Space Force, man. This is basically Trump is bringing back the Reagan era Space Command. And so at this point, it probably makes sense to explain the differences between Space Command and Space Force.
Okay.
So the United States military, first of all, up until Space Force, it had 5 branches, right? Marines, Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, and Navy. So the branches that we all know are responsible for training people, ordering weapons, trying to figure out what kind of weapons they need, developing new stuff, etc. But let's say, for instance, that you join the Air Force. Okay, well, you're an Air Force member, but after you become a pilot or whatever, you are put under what's called a combatant command. So, for instance, and there were 10 of them, not counting space, and they are Africa, the Southern Command, which is like South America, the Northern Command, which is North America. Basically, Space Command was a regional. It wasn't a branch of the military. It was a regional designation of which generals you'd be listening to, right?
Okay.
So Space Command was basically adding a new domain of warfighting. It wasn't like a separate branch of the military. And so people from, as we learned when Space Force was reestablished, people from the Air Force, Navy, Army, they all kind of work together under the command of like whatever generals have the domain of space. And so that existed from when Reagan established it to 2002, when they decided to basically de-emphasize space as a war-fighting domain. But evidence suggests, in fact, flat out, I mean, I found a paper that the Space Command was a totally amazing tool to have, basically. And in fact, I found a paper that was written by an academic for the Department of Defense, and it was entitled. It was from 1997. It was for the U.S. Air War College, and it was called "What the Warfighter Should Know About Space: A Report to the Joint Space Support Teams." And we have a link to this in the description. There's nothing earth-shattering in it, but it describes how in 1993, the U.S. Space Command was conducting outreach looking to basically improve their services. And it goes into basically how important the U.S. Space Command was for the Gulf War, and that it was just like amazing at like finding Scud missiles and like basically coordinating things to defeat Iraq so soundly in the first Gulf War, which really makes you wonder, like, why did we de-emphasize it before the second Gulf War?
Yeah, I'm assuming they were using like satellites to locate things, and that's mainly what they were doing, I would assume.
Yeah, what happened was what used to be the Space Command basically lost its designation, and space services were kind of shuffled into what's called strategic demand, which is kind of a more intelligence-y type command field. And early on, the paper cites U.S. General Ashey, who was the leader of Space Command in the 90s, as saying, "We will engage targets from space, and this command will engage ships, airplanes, land targets from space. The missions are already assigned, and we've written the concepts and operations." So he was admitting in the 90s we want to attack stuff from space, which I believe is technically against international law. But when has that ever stopped anybody?
Yeah, there's a treaty and stuff.
The only other thing I found interesting in that paper, other than the fact that Space Command was rolling in the 80s and 90s, is that they actually call their satellite communication system UFO.
Oh, okay.
UHF follow-on. So after 2002, we took away space as its own domain for fighting. So exactly 25 years to the month, Trump first mentioned Space Force in a speech to Marines. And 25 years to the month of Reagan initiating Space Command.
Oh, okay.
He did it in March of 1983. So first, it's worth wondering the connections between Reagan starting Space Command, which would ostensibly put a lot of high-tech space technologies in the military hands instead of the intelligence community hands.
Yeah.
And one has to wonder if, like, his personal interest or experience with UFOs and the way he talked about them a couple times, one has to wonder if maybe he wasn't pulling an old JFK trick out of the bag to see what he could find out. And, it was successful until 2002. Donald Trump claims to have never seen a UFO, but I did find a weird quote from him this year in June of 2020 when he told an Associated Press reporter, quote, "I've heard some interesting things about Roswell, but I'm not going to share them even with the eldest child."
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and I just don't see Trump as the type of guy who would want secrets hidden from him.
Oh, no.
He acts like he's disinterested and he doesn't believe, but, like, I just, with all the issues he has with, like, the quote deep state and intelligence and stuff, like, I just can't see him just, like, rolling over and being like, all right, I don't need to know.
Yeah, or he knows and he doesn't want anybody else to know that he knows. That would be more what I lean towards.
Ooh, that's a good one. You know what? I'm leaning towards that now because that makes a lot of sense. And so to draw some similarities, JFK, Reagan, Trump, all famously more friendly with Russia than the intelligence community is comfortable with, for instance. And all three, wanted to start these space programs, whether it be NASA, Space Command, or Space Force. And it should also be noted that the Pentagon top brass in 2018, when this first was announced by Trump, kind of opposed the idea of Space Force, and it received a lot of ridicule, very similarly to Reagan's idea of the Space Command.
Huh.
So, and it's really amazing. Like, I remember Space Force kind of being like a joke when he first said it, but, like, stuff fell in line really quickly.
Man, is the Pentagon just getting ahead of some stuff that Space Force is getting ready to do or say? Like, with their, like plan to release documents in the next few months or whatever? Like,
I have my own theory. I think that's part of it. So actually, it turns out, and people might not know this because I was getting confused when I was researching, Trump not only started Space Force, he also restarted Space Command. So the first thing he did in 2018, the first time that, quote, Space Force was founded, was actually just restarting Space Command, which, as we just discussed a few minutes ago, is declaring space as basically its own war zone. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing he did. And then in 2019, he went one step above Reagan and founded the sixth branch of the Armed Services, Space Force. So I remember us discussing this at the time, being like, oh, isn't that already kind of a thing that exists? And why are they already saying all these Army people and Navy people already work in space? Well, this is why. Basically, Space Command became part of Strategic Command. He pulled it out of there, made it its own thing, and then added a whole new branch that would be, like, connected to Space Command.
Ooh.
So for the first time in history, basically, we not only have space as a warfighting domain, we are training people specifically in a branch of the military to fight in space.
Yeah.
So essentially, he added one new command, making it 11 commands instead of 10, and one new branch, making it 6 branches instead of 5. Now, it could be argued at this point, Patrick, that he has pulled a JFK Reagan, and he's basically removed layers of secrecy and bureaucracy that would come between him and whatever secret space program we have.
Based on what we know about Reagan and JFK, it is. I wouldn't have thought that before, but now I kind of am.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he got some blowback. And when I first had this epiphany, I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, is Trump pulling a JFK? I never would have thought about it until we did our last episode. And I never thought this would be a sequel to that one. But I kind of think that's what he's doing, along with some other things. I think he also wants there to be a space army. But given all the disclosure that's happening and stuff, like I feel like this might be a way for him to try to dig in and like try to take control of whatever's going on.
Yeah, I can
So
see that.
yeah, and but then when I thought I had basically completed the story, I stumbled upon another aspect to Space Force that really ties this all together. And that is that Space Force is not a two-part process. It's not just Space Command and Space Force. There is a third part to Trump's plan that is waiting in the wings. And this is in mainstream defense news, and it's basically been a war between the intelligence community and the Department of Defense playing out over some seemingly boring things, but it actually means a lot. And I had stumbled upon this because I read a comment by UFO researcher Michael Sala, who was like pumped on Space Force. And in 2018, he came out and had a quote that said, "It's important to understand that by ordering the creation of a Space Force, Trump is shaking the bureaucratic and corporate trees that hides the secret space program that is run alongside with the Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office." He continued, "Large aerospace companies such as Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, etc., supply the technology and components for the secret space program. Consequently, the military-industrial complex/deep state has played a major role in getting space policy due to its ability to manipulate Air Force officials through the supply and acquisition process." And regardless of the UFO aspect, this actually makes sense because it would make sense that basically all this technology has been developed, and we know that the military industrial complex, a lot of what they do with the secret stuff, the secret UFO stuff, is they kind of shuffle it off to intelligence agencies and they shuffle it off to industry because the industry doesn't have to answer freedom of information requests, etc. They just work on their little UFO parts. Just like Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell speech, and then the Air Force is kind of at their whim. Now, notice he said that Trump was going to shake the trees, the bureaucratic and corporate trees of the secret space program, and he mentioned another government agency, the National Reconnaissance Office.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
The NRO. It turns out that from the very beginning in 2018, it's been part of the goal of the people trying to form a unified space force to eventually gobble up the NRO into its fold. And this really lays bare quite a lot of stuff. Do you want to get into what the NRO is?
Yeah.
It's one of our 17 intelligence agencies. And it's also part of the Department of Defense. It's one of the only ones that is actually both intelligence and military. It's considered one of the big five, along with the NSA, Central Intelligence Agency, etc.
Okay, and yet I don't know that I've ever really heard of this.
It is it's the agency basically, Pat, that is responsible for developing, building, launching, and operating space reconnaissance systems. And it's actually estimated that they acquire about 50% of our intelligence among all the intelligence agencies.
Whoa.
They are extremely powerful. They are a hybrid agency, which makes them more secretive than even the CIA, for instance. They have been called by different people, quote, NASA's evil black ops twin. And in short, these are the people with the space satellites and probably space weapons, if we have them.
Oh, okay.
This is the agents that has satellite weapons, and all of our spy satellites, like the super secret ones we talked about in earlier episodes, that can see a smile on your face or anything entering the atmosphere, anything from if a UFO comes to like what's going on the ground, like these are the people. And it's basically considered a secret space program, but it's out in the open. And when we talk about deep state, man, this is like, it does not get much deeper than the NRO. Officially, they were founded in 1960, but unlike the CIA and stuff, we were actually never supposed to know they existed. Nobody had an inkling that this thing existed until 1973 when a congressional document like accidentally forgot to scrub it out. So, and then even then, we really only knew the name. We're like, this thing exists called the NRO. It was founded in 1960. It was not its doings, its existence. Just the fact that it exists was not declassified until 1992. And they got the space satellites. They got the secret technology. They're NASA's evil twin. And just looking at mainstream stuff, man, you want to talk deep state, dark. I even think these people might be involved with the MIB. They got it all, man. You want secret funds? In 1995, the Washington Post revealed that the NRO was hoarding billions of dollars in cash that it was keeping secret from the CIA and Congress. So they're hiding stuff from the CIA. And when asked about it, the CIA general counsel at the time, who led an investigation to it, said, we have revealed that the NRO has for years accumulated very substantial amounts of money in a rainy day fund. So they're like playing games on the CIA. They have independence of leadership. Traditionally, before it was all declassified, they were kind of run by the Air Force, but after 2005, it's an independent position. They have split oversight because they're part intelligence, part military, which makes it especially hard for Congress to figure out what the heck's going on because like different committees see different parts of it. You want to talk about outsourcing technology in the military industrial complex. The majority of their work is actually done by private contractors. They said like 7 out of 8, every $8 goes into private corporations. They have the most advanced technology. How advanced, do you ask? So advanced that in the 1980s, they had satellite and software that was capable of determining the exact dimensions of a tank gun. And in 2012, they donated, like to a poor child, they donated 2 telescopes to NASA, which were far more advanced than the Hubble Space Telescope.
Wow. And that was just some stuff that they were done with, basically, probably.
As one journalist observed, if telescopes of this caliber are languishing on the shelves and could be given away, imagine what they're actually using.
That was my thought, exactly.
And they're doing some shady stuff. Also in 2012, in fact, giving that stuff to NASA might have been part of a public relation things. In 2012, an investigation found that they were breaching ethical and legal boundaries by encouraging polygraph examiners to extract personal and private information from Department of Defense personnel and counterintelligence people.
Wow.
They were basically keeping book on people.
Yeah. If I didn't know everything I know about the CIA, I would feel kind of bad, but it's just kind of funny in a weird way.
Yeah, in
like
2000
somebody's messing with them.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
scared of the NRO now. But
I'm terrified of the NRO, and they're not just satellites. Like they basically got all the info, man. Like the satellites, their big weapon. And numerous people have pointed out, like, if there is footage of UFOs, like, these people
have it.
They have it, yeah. I mean, and probably the best stuff if they're not using the technology. They're basically, I mean, they're very powerful. So
like it.
So they would keep book on people. They would keep they do these weird polygraphs and like get them to admit to like felonies and stuff, and they just like keep it on them without telling anybody. And so this organization, it turns out, though, given that they're the people with the space satellites, everyone has realized since 2018 that if Space Force is really going to be its own thing, they need to control the NRO.
Oh.
So in April of 2019, acting Defense Secretary for the United States, Patrick Shanahan, indicated there could be an integration of the National Reconnaissance Office into the Space Force down the line, despite a decision to leave it on its own for now. Speaking to the Armed Services Committee about the formation of Space Force, Shanahan was asked by Ranking Member Jack Reed why the NRO wasn't already put under the potential new branch of the military. His answer was that he didn't want to delay Space Force for now, but they would figure out a way to work NRO into the picture. He told the committee that technical discussions would come up at one point in time that would enable an integration between the intelligence agency and the Pentagon, and that there would need to be discussions with, quote, stakeholders.
Okay.
Yeah. And when he says stakeholders, he means like the Department of Defense has to figure out a way to like convince the intelligence community to like let this go.
Yeah.
And they're not having any of it. So from 2018 to 2019, the Department of Defense had already signaled their willingness and really their desire to take over the NRO. And this is still raging on to this day. Space Review, a website that covers defense and space stuff, reported this year that in the long term, the nature and mission of Space Force's intelligence organization is going to determine whether the new service can accomplish its mission. Once the United States Space Force was established, it became obvious it would have to have its own intelligence organization. And there will be other controversies the Space Force and its supporters will have to deal with. Its roles in missile defense is going to have to be clarified and defined, and its relationship to the NRO. And Defense News is also reporting, as of last month, the battle for NRO takes shape as Space and the Air Forces grapple with acquisition. Insiders say the wisdom of maintaining the long-standing and often hard-fought split between the black and white space programs is once again being questioned. On the military side, said one official close to the debate, the central question is, why should the Space Force be any different than any other service? The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines all handle their own classified research, and why shouldn't the Space Force be the same? So the Air Force is basically saying, like, we don't have the money to, like, create our own thing out of nowhere. Like, you need to eventually, like, give us the NRO.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this. Do you know Trump is like on a loyalty spree with the Pentagon? He was like going through like
No.
He was like doing like loyalty interviews and like trying to install people. And the Shanahan guy, very loyal. But the intelligence community is not having it. They're fighting back. And if anything, they're arguing that it should be the other way around, and the Pentagon should be serving them. Mm-hmm. The Department of Defense, in a written statement to Defense News, said that we have had very robust and vibrant discussions with the NRO about their acquisition authorities and how they execute them. The Department of Defense was ordered to submit a report in March of this year about how they're handling the NRO, how they're working with them, etc., but they're yet to do so. Another USG source closely watching the debate characterized the Department of Defense's approach to the acquisition issue as baby steps towards a Space Force land grab. The Department of Defense, the official said, is going to slowly remove the dirt under Chantilly, which is the name of the NRO's headquarters, for them to have no choice but to slide down and to be another part of Space Force Command.
Okay.
What we do know for sure is that senior DoD officials are extremely aware, almost to the point of paranoia, that even discussing the issue of the NRO being subsumed by Space Force is playing with fire. That's a big deal when like a defense magazine is saying like the Department of Defense is playing with fire.
Yeah.
And And the NRO, man, they do not want it. They have made their own position crystal clear. Like, we are our own thing. If anything, you need to be giving us money to be doing stuff for you. Despite the fact that in 2016, a study pointed out that numerous studies dating back to 2001, including a Space Commission report by Donald Rumsfeld, recommended the merger of all Department of Defense space acquisition bodies and authorities, including the NRO, into one executive office, complicating the ongoing discussion about exactly what acquisition powers Space Force should have. With the NRO is the heavy bureaucratic political baggage involved in the often testy relationship between the DoD and NRO. The military space community has long complained that the NRO does not play well with other children, and so the debate rages on. So, this is the 3 parts of Space Force.
Yeah, I was not aware of any of that.
We got our Space Command, so we're going to fight in space. We're training people specifically to do it, and they need their own intelligence thing under their wing, under their control, just like the other branches have. And it makes perfect sense for that to be this super black ops NRO. And for the past 2 years, there's been a battle over that. And if the Department of Defense wins, then basically, like, Kennedy's dream of the military being in control of stuff is going to come partly true. Because it will, obviously some stuff will still be secret, but it won't be in the hands of the intelligence community and military-industrial complex. It'll be more, traditional.
Yeah. That's... we'll see what happens. NRO sounds like, I don't know, they're not going to go easily into this.
No, and they're making all kinds of arguments about why they can't be Space Force. They do all this stuff for other people, etc. I think it just sounds like they like having their own thing going on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But
sounds like they're extremely powerful, and they don't want any help.
No.
And they don't want anybody to know what they're doing either.
No. And I love, when you look at the description of, like, the structure and duties of the NRO, like, they are in charge of themselves as far as what to give people.
Yeah.
Like, one of their duties is deciding what access to give. So, for instance, if the Air Force or Navy or Space Force wants data from a satellite, they are not given access. You have to tell the NRO what you want, and they will do it for you and give you what they give you. You could not say, "Hey, move over." If you're the top general in the Army, you cannot say, "Hey, NRO, I need the satellite for 15 minutes." Like, you have to go through them. They are extremely powerful. And so to tie this in a bow, I think what may be going on here is Trump is, as the UFO Michael Salla. You know what I just realized? Michael Salla is the guy who wrote the book that we did 2 weeks ago.
Is he?
Yeah. So, wow. So
well, that makes sense.
He actually made an appearance in both episodes. So in his opinion, this is literally the guy who wrote the book on Eisenhower, JFK, and UFOs, and the presidents fighting the military-industrial complex. This is Trump doing the same thing that previous presidents have done, to try to take the stuff out of the dark world and put it into, like, the hands of, like, what is controlled by elected people, which could be huge.
Well, yeah, that would definitely be a big deal.
I can't believe I said huge while talking about Trump.
I wasn't gonna hone in on it, but you did.
I should probably say also that I have a ton of links this week, and you'll probably notice I never discussed it, but some of them are going to be of supposed UFOs messing stuff up in Iraq. So just know that if you click on that, then I meant to get to that, but we just didn't get around to it.
So, well, maybe another time. Maybe another time. This was interesting, man.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm going to definitely be watching when Space Force comes up. I'm going to be watching what debates are happening about it.
Yeah.
Because it might kind of live or die based on whether or not it's able. Like, from what I could tell, the NRO is making a really strong case for you could just cooperate with us, and they're saying like, well, there's really no way to do that because we have to have our own control over stuff, and we can't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
So I will keep an eye out on this.
Yeah, as I say, this might be something to come back to once it shakes out. I'd be interested to hear, and especially if NRO gets absorbed, we're probably going to have more stuff to talk about.
Also, just to go back to the beginning, like, I believe Gary McKinnon, having read all the stuff about the NRO and stuff, I completely believe he saw what he saw.
Yeah, I don't doubt him at all.
No. So, Space Force, same as it ever was, man. It just never went away. We just keep changing the name. And sometimes it's in the light, sometimes it's in the darkness, and this is a season where it's time to step out in the light.
Well, they run the same plays across the board, I think, is what we're finding.
Yeah, it goes back and forth. It is interesting, though. Like George W., his dad was head of the CIA back in the day. Like, it is interesting that it kind of got shelved up when the CIA person got back into power.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So, there's my Donald Trump fan fiction for the week. He's fighting the deep state to uncover the UFO technologies. Wow. I actually think it's kind of I don't know if it's his idea or if the military got in his ear, but I just, this has made me more interested in that now.
I think this is a longer play than him, honestly.
I do too. I think it's part of an ongoing thing between the military. Yeah. So,
each president gets cued in on it, and
they take their sides.
Yeah, I think that's probably what happens. Yeah. So thank you for putting this together, Dennis. This was a cool follow-up and second part, basically, to the JFK stuff and the UFO stuff.
It was my pleasure. There probably won't be a part 3 for now, but we'll see. Who knows what the future holds.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We appreciate it. Again, like, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, write a review, do all the things that can help the show out. We appreciate it. And we'll be back next week. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.